We managed to carry on most of our feature engineering steps utilizing open source packages. But there were two transformations for which we didn't find a suitable class. So we're going to create our own transformers to perform those transformations. The first transformation that we need is to capture the difference between the year in which the house was sold and the year in which the house was built or remodeled, for example. In order to create these transformers, from Scikit-Learn base, we're going to import the base estimator to define the parameters and the transformer mix-in to inherit the fit transform functionality. So then we create a class and we call it Temporal Variable Transformer, and we inherit the methods and attributes from these two objects from Scikit-Learn. Then we will create an init method with the parameters that this class will take when it is initialized. We're going to create an argument called variables, where we pass the list of variables that we want to calculate the difference for, and then the reference value, which is the variable against which we're going to calculate this difference. We can add as many error handling lines of code as we want. In this particular case, we are checking if variables is not a list, then we're going to raise a value error that outputs the message variables should be a list. This helps the user identify whether they passed the wrong value to one of these parameters. We're going to keep it simple and we're not going to use anything for reference value, but you can see that you can also add a check for this parameter as well. Then we need to set these attributes to the class. So self.variables is going to take the value entered by the user, and self.reference value is also going to take the parameter entered by the user. We then are going to initialize the method fit that will take self and then the data frame and the option to take a target, and this is so that the class is compatible with the Scikit-Learn functionality, and this particular transformer doesn't really learn anything from the data, so this method is only going to return self. If we just wanted to create a class for ourselves, we may as well omit this fit method, but because we want this class to be compatible with Scikit-Learn pipeline, we need to have the fit method here. The transform method will take self, of course, and then the data frame that we want to transform is going to make a copy of this data frame so that we don't modify the data frame that was passed as argument. And here we're going to loop for each variable in the variables that we want to determine the difference for, and we're going to replace the original value by the reference variable, which in this case is going to be the year sold, minus the variable of interest. So with this class, as it stands, we can calculate the difference between one variable or one set of variables and the reference variables for as many variables as we want. The next class that we need is the mapper that will allow us to recode the string of some categorical variables by a certain user-defined mapping. So here we create the class that we call mapper, which will inherit from the base estimator and the transformer mix-in the methods and attributes. When we initialize this class, we need the user to indicate which variables need the remapping and which are the mappings that should be used to replace these variables. We can add an error handling here, for example, to check if the value passed to variables is a list, and if this is not the case, we can raise an error. We can also create a check to determine if the values passed to mapping is, for example, a dictionary or not. Then we assign these values to the class, so self.variables will take the values entered as variables, and self.mappings will take the values entered as mappings. In this case, our transformer doesn't learn anything again, but we do need the fit method to make it compatible with the Scikit-Learn pipeline. And to transform, we create the transform method that takes the data frame. It makes a copy so that it does not override the original data frame. And then for each feature in self.variables, so for each features in the variables that we want to remap, we replace the original content of the feature by the mappings utilizing pandas map function. This code is identical to the one that we used in the notebook. But now, with one dictionary with the mappings, we can transform automatically as many variables as we want.